Well, our speech today is from one of our most accomplished rising stars, Jeff Chilson. As you know, Jeff currently serves as president of the Rising Stars Toastmasters Club. And as president, he's proven to be a very effective leader and communicator. Today, Jeff is going to provide us with some evidence on improving one of the most important parts of any speech, meeting, or really communication in general: the conclusion. The conclusion you provide at a meeting ensures that everyone leaves understanding what the deliverables are and what they're responsible for. The conclusion you provide at the end of a speech ensures that your message is taken away as you intended. In all communications, a strong conclusion is necessary to ensure that your message is communicated as effectively as possible. I look forward to what Jeff has to present today. Timer, Jeff has requested that he have the green flag at 8 minutes, the yellow flag at 10 minutes, and the red flag at 12 minutes, which is a little bit different from our standard timing regimen. And with that, please join me in welcoming Jeff.
Before I begin, I have a few sheets I'd like to hand out. As Tom mentioned, this comes from the Better Speaker series, and so to benefit everybody, I wanted to give everyone a copy of the module because it's available to anybody in Toastmasters. You can download any of these particular modules to review for your own purposes. But speaking of challenges, I've had a challenge lately. I had a great cup of spiced tea. And I've been trying to find something that tastes just like it. And I thought I'd found it. I went out and I bought this box of Bengal spiced tea. Sure enough, the first taste of it was fabulous. Wonderful flavor, great mix. But then, as I went down that cup, to about the bottom third, it started to taste really kind of syrupy and sweet. It really killed the whole experience of drinking that entire cup. Now, maybe you've had an experience just like that one. Maybe it's that bad aftertaste in a diet soda, it's a greasy bite of that last dish you just had, or maybe it's that dessert. It's too sweet, too rich to finish at the end of the meal. That underscores the importance of concluding and finishing well. Whenever we speak, we need to make sure that we finish strong, because how we finish flavors the entire experience of everything that we've been trying to present up to that point. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about having a good, strong conclusion in your presentation. A few things I'd like to cover today are what's the character of making a very successful conclusion? And then talk about some various methods or techniques you can use to conclude your speeches. And last, I have some tips for success, some pitfalls, or some key things that you really want to write into your conclusion as you deliver it. Let me start there with these keys to a successful conclusion. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure you achieve for your audience a sense of closure. You want to key them in that you're wrapping things up, that they need to pay attention once again, that you've completed your thoughts. So give them a brief set of words to let them know. So just say, in conclusion, I'd like to say, or in summary, give them some key simple phrase to kick off your conclusion and let them know you're wrapping up. The next thing is thinking in an outline form. What is the size of that conclusion? How long should it be? Roughly speaking, you want it to be maybe 10% or less of the entire speech. So say for a 10-minute speech, we're talking about just 1 minute. You want to make sure that your conclusion just doesn't keep running on long and long and keeping going. Think of those times when maybe you've heard somebody give a testimonial at the end of a speech, right? They're giving a long personal story. And you probably remember that story a whole lot better than the content of their message. So you want to make sure that you make that conclusion succinct so that the message gets across very clearly and they take it home with them. And last thing, most important, you want to make sure that in that 1 minute you craft it well. You want those final words to have an impact. So there are different ways we can conclude a message or our presentation. The first thing is, when you think about what sort of technique or method it is you want to use to conclude your speech, know what kind of speech it is you're giving. Toastmasters and the Competent Communication Manual list 4 different types of speeches that we frequently give. You have an informational speech. You might be trying to persuade or inspire people, or you're trying to entertain people. So think, first of all, what type of speech it is you're giving, and then apply one of these 6 techniques appropriately. Now, in an informational speech, the one we typically tend to give, one of the most common ways to conclude is simply summarizing your points again. Now, when you try to do this, you want to make sure that you don't just simply restate your points again, because once again, your goal here is to try and impact your audience. So restate them and give them a little bit more weight this time. So for example, if I were concluding today's speech, I might say something like, be certain that your conclusion is brief, craft your words carefully by choosing the right technique, and follow those tips for success. Most of all, memorize your conclusion. Memorize it, memorize it, memorize it. Another example, or another technique you can use to conclude a speech is to use a quotation. Make sure, of course, that your quotation that you're using is going to fit well to the topic of your speech. For example, for today's speech, I might end it this way. Toastmasters International President Michael Natoro once said, "Average speakers focus on themselves. Good speakers focus on the message, but great speakers focus on the audience." Make sure when you finish your speech, you focus on your audience and finish strong. Another way to conclude a speech is to tell a short story or an anecdote. Once again, keep it short and make sure that it relates very well to your speech. So if I were to conclude today's speech with that technique, I would say something like this. It was speech project number 6, vocal variety. I just given this great speech about my voyage on the Dawn Treader on Lake Huron, but I had written myself into a corner. I just didn't know how to end it, and so I had a 2-line conclusion. The feedback that I got most from everybody in the room was it was too abrupt and really didn't bring the whole story together. Finish strong. Another way, call for action. If you're doing a persuasive speech, or perhaps an inspirational speech, you want to make sure that you give your audience something specific to do. So clearly state for them that next step. So if I were concluding today, I might say, when you give your next speech, choose one of these ending techniques and craft your words so they make a lasting impression on your audience. Another method, ask a rhetorical question. Nice way to end perhaps an inspirational speech. Sometimes you give a persuasive speech and it's not something that you can necessarily give them something specific, but you at least need to leave them thinking. This is a great idea. So I might say to conclude today's speech, consider the impact of your conclusion, write it well. Does your audience carry home the message that you want to give? And last, another technique is to try and tie the beginning of your speech and the ending of your speech together. Stay tuned for an example of that. That's what I'm trying to do today. So those are some techniques you can use. Here are some tips for success. These are some pitfalls to avoid, or some things that will really help your conclusions stand out. One is try and refrain from bringing up new points. If in the body of your speech you realize later on that you may have forgotten something or skipped over it, don't try and slip it in on the end there in the conclusion. You're going to confuse your audience a little bit. The conclusion is not going to have that weight and impact that you wanted it to have. So if you realize you've done that, consider instead just trying to send out an email or a follow-up afterwards. That's probably a better approach. Make sure that conclusion has its weight. The next thing, stay on time. I'm sure we've all been through one of those speeches where the speaker has sort of reached their mark as far as their allotted time. And they see the light coming, and they just kind of sprint through the end and wrap up really quick and try and get there. and it just doesn't finish well. Once again, you want to finish strong, and that conclusion, that's the last impression the audience has. So make sure that you hit your mark on your time, planned and prepared well, and that you don't have to sprint through that ending, so you keep your audience with you. Here's another one idea, and you might want to write this one down because this wasn't in the module, but I've heard this before, and I think it's really good advice. At least consider it. Try concluding after question and answer. Question and answer times sometimes make your speech end on a whimper. I mean, you've all seen PowerPoints, and they get through this great speech, and in the end, they throw up that slide that just says Q&A. And from that point on, the speaker has completely lost control of all the material he's just presented. Because we all know those questions start to go way off in left field somewhere. But instead, try concluding this way. Say to your audience, before I conclude, I'd like to discuss these ideas with the audience. Do you have any questions? And then from that point, have a very defined question and answer session. And if you know you're going to get one of these questions that's just going to run you off into the field, say very briefly, 1 or 2 minutes, and answer that question. And say, if you'd like to discuss that further, stop up after the presentation. We can talk about that one-on-one. Be in control of your question and answer period. And then you set your audience up for that final conclusion. They're still paying attention to that whole Q&A session, waiting for that conclusion. Once again, this is your last chance to make an impression. And especially after a question and answer period, this is your chance for getting in that last word. They're going to take home what it is that you say at the very end and go home with it. And the last part, and this is the most important, memorize your conclusion. I know memorizing a speech is pretty hard, especially the longer and longer they're going to go. And if you don't have notes to work from, it's very difficult. But at least challenge yourself to attempt this idea. Memorize your introduction and memorize your conclusion. At least take that first step. If you can deliver that powerful message at the very beginning and then finish strong, you'll see immediately that your speaking level goes up one entire notch. You'll really have an impact on your audience. So memorize your conclusion. So those are some ideas, some ways of sort of outlining what you should think about when you're writing your conclusion, that last 10%. Some different techniques you can try, and some tips for success and having a good, powerful conclusion. Think of it this way. Presentation is a lot like a special dinner. Think of the time when you may have gone out for an anniversary dinner or a special occasion at a great restaurant. What did you have? You had an appetizer. It really kicks off the meal, whets everybody's appetite, starts that conversation going, everybody's anticipating this great time. And then you have that entree. That main dish with the side dishes right next to it, perfectly coordinated, brilliant presentation. It's got it all together. And then concludes. You got that dessert. That great piece at the end that everybody always kind of probably remembers more than anything else. And it celebrates the very end of that time together. That dessert, that conclusion, flavors the entire experience of the meal. Think about that and make sure you finish strong. Joe Smith.